In 1918, Germany told the United States that any American soldier captured carrying a specific weapon would be executed on the spot, not imprisoned. Executed. The formal diplomatic note went through the Swiss embassy to Secretary of State Robert Lansing. It cited the Hague Convention. It called the weapon a violation of the laws of war. The weapon was not a chemical agent, not a flamethrower, not a machine gun. Germany had already deployed all three without apology. It was a pump-action shotgun, a 12-gauge, originally built for duck hunters and stagecoach guards, sold at retail for $25. And Germany wanted every soldier caught holding one put to death. The United States responded with 2 words, "Try it," then threatened to execute German prisoners in equal number. This is the Winchester Model 1897. It fought in 4 American wars across 7 decades. It was carried into Vietnam by soldiers whose grandfathers could have carried the same weapon in France. It was feared enough that 2 different enemies 50 years apart tried to have it banned from the battlefield. What did this shotgun do that made an empire threaten to kill anyone caught holding it? John Moses Browning had a problem. His previous design, the Winchester Model 1893, couldn't handle the new smokeless powder cartridges. The pressures cracked the open-top receiver. Occasionally, the frame burst during firing. Browning didn't patch it. He rebuilt the entire concept. He strengthened and lengthened the frame, closed the top with a solid steel bridge, moved ejection to the right side. No more debris blowing back into the shooter's face. He kept the external hammer that every other designer was eliminating as old-fashioned. Browning kept it because a man operating in total darkness could brush his thumb across the back of the receiver and know instantly whether it was cocked. Then he made the decision that would define 70 years of warfare. He left out the trigger disconnector. In a modern shotgun, you pull the trigger and must release it before the next shot. The disconnector forces that reset. The 1897 had no disconnector. Hold the trigger. Pump the action. The instant the bolt locks into battery, the hammer drops. Pump again. It fires again as fast as your arm can move. Winchester sold it for $25. 8 pounds of machined steel and walnut. They marketed it to sportsmen. They had no idea what it would become, but the 1897 was about to find out. In a jungle 12,000 miles from Connecticut, the United States military bought approximately 200 Model 1897s in 1900 and shipped them to the Philippines. American troops were fighting the Moro guerrillas, warriors from the southern islands who were not ordinary combatants by any definition the U.S. Army understood. The Moro Mentados bound their limbs with tight leather cords to restrict blood flow, used ritual preparation that pushed pain tolerance beyond what Western soldiers had encountered, and charged American lines with heavy-bladed weapons at full sprint. The standard issue .38 long Colt sidearm could not stop them. The Craig Jurgensen bolt-action rifle could put a round through a charging Moro warrior, and the man would keep coming. Driven by adrenaline and commitment that rendered individual bullet wounds irrelevant. The 1897 solved what the rifle couldn't. At 10 m, a 12-gauge load of buckshot didn't wound. It stopped. One trigger pull delivered 9.33 caliber projectiles into a space no charging man could survive. The military noticed the 1897 had passed its audition. The Philippines proved the 1897 could stop what rifles couldn't. But what happened when it reached the trenches of France, and what Germany did about it, is the part of this story that made me verify it twice. The 1897 had proven it belonged in war. Now war was about to dress it for the job. When General Pershing's staff looked at the Western Front and recognized the same close-quarters problem the Philippines had presented, they reached for the 1897. But the civilian version needed to change. Winchester engineers bolted a 6-row ventilated steel heat shield over the barrel, slam-firing 6 rounds of 12-gauge turned thin steel into a branding iron. A soldier needed to grab the barrel to thrust the bayonet, and without the shield, his palms would burn to the bone. They clamped a heavy lug to the muzzle that accepted the M1917 sword bayonet. 17 in of blade. The 1897 was now a short spear that fired buckshot. They added sling swivels so a man could carry it over the parapet with both hands free. Winchester delivered approximately 19,000 trench guns to the American Expeditionary Forces. 5 divisions, the 5th, 32nd, 35th, 77th, and 82nd, received allotments for combat trials and patrols and raids. The 1897 arrived in France as a hunting tool. It left us something its designer never imagined. But it had one flaw, and in the mud of France, that flaw nearly killed it. The standard military shot shells of 1918 used paper hulls sealed with wax. In the standing water and perpetual mud of the Western Front, the paper absorbed moisture. The shells swelled inside the tubular magazine. When a soldier tried to rack the pump under fire, the bloated cartridge wedged in the action. The trench broom became a club. Soldiers adapted. They kept shells and waxed cartons on trench shelves, stuffed handfuls into pockets, loaded one at a time rather than trusting the magazine's spring against swollen hulls. The flaw was real. It did not stop them from using it because nothing else in the inventory could do what the 1897 did inside those trenches. The standard infantry rifles of 1918 were 5-foot precision instruments built to hit targets at hundreds of yards. Inside a trench system rarely wider than a man's shoulders, swinging a 5-foot rifle around a blind corner was a problem that could kill you before you solved it. The 1897 was 40 inches. It fired 9 pellets of double buckshot per shell. A trained doughboy could slam fire all 6 rounds in approximately 5 seconds. 54. 33 caliber projectiles into a 9 by 3-foot corridor. Colonel H.J. Hunt of the 6th Infantry reported the shotgun highly effective in scouting and patrolling. Captain H.P. Blanks of the 61st Infantry praised its short-range performance in raids. Peter Carney, a wartime journalist, wrote that the 1897 carried more terrors into the hearts of the enemy than any other instrument. The terror was so complete that Germany did something no nation had done before, tried to outlaw a shotgun from war. On September 19, 1918, Germany filed its protest through the Swiss embassy. The note cited Article 23E of the 1907 HEG Convention, the clause prohibiting weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. Germany declared that any American prisoner found with a shotgun or shotgun ammunition forfeited his life. 9 days later, Secretary of State Robert Lansing responded. Brigadier General Ansel of the Judge Advocate General's office had concluded that buckshot pellets, each .33 caliber, were smaller than standard rifle bullets. Condemning the shotgun would logically require condemning every rifle, machine gun, and artillery shell that fragmented on impact. Then the United States made its own threat. If Germany executed a single American soldier for carrying a shotgun, the United States would initiate immediate reciprocal executions of German prisoners. Germany never carried out the threat. The nation that had unleashed chlorine gas, mustard gas, and flamethrowers without diplomatic hesitation had formally begged for mercy from a pump-action shotgun and lost. The war ended. The 1897 didn't retire. It changed uniforms. After the armistice, roughly 25,000 model 1897 sat in military storage. The 20 inches riot configuration, no heat shield, no bayonet lug, moved straight into American law enforcement. Police departments adopted it for patrol cars and high-risk operations. The same slam fire that had cleared German trenches was now clearing speakeasies. The same action that had terrified an army now terrified bootleggers in Chicago alleyways. The takedown variant, which could be split into 2 halves and hidden inside a coat, made it useful on both sides of the law. Winchester kept the production lines running alongside their newer Model 12. The 1897 refused to be replaced. The uniform changed. The violence didn't. The 1897 survived Prohibition, survived the Depression, survived being called obsolete by every ordnance officer in the Army. And then Pearl Harbor happened, and they pulled it out of storage again. 23 years after the armistice, the phone rang again. December 7, 1941. The military opened its deep storage arsenals and pulled the 1897s out of Cosmoline. Then they ordered more. Winchester delivered over 24,000 new trench guns by March 1943. A Marine point man pushes through jungle so dense he cannot see 10 m ahead. The weapon on his shoulder has an exposed hammer and a ventilated heat shield. His grandfather could have carried the same model at Bellewood. He does not care about history. He cares that the weapon in his hand cycles every time he pumps it. The paper hull was gone. The military had switched to all brass shells, impervious to humidity, impervious to mud. The flaw that had plagued France was solved. The 1897 in the Pacific was the best version of itself it had ever been. A weapon designed in the 1890s was clearing Japanese bunkers in 1944, and it still wasn't finished. The 1897 was nearly 70 years old. American soldiers in the 1960s were carrying a weapon that predated the Wright brothers' first flight. The men around them carried M16s, black plastic and aluminum, the future of infantry warfare. The man with the 1897 carried 8 pounds of walnut and steel from another century. Other soldiers looked at it with confusion. Then they watched him use it. The confusion became understanding. Vietnam's triple canopy compressed engagement distances below 30 meters. The M16 fired 1 projectile per trigger pull. In an ambush at 15 m, where a target appeared for a fraction of a second through a gap in foliage, 1 projectile required aim. The situation didn't allow. 9 pellets of buckshot filled the gap whether you aimed or not. The 1897 was not always the right choice. Its tubular magazine loaded 1 shell at a time, a severe disadvantage against AK-47s with 30-round magazines. Its effective range dropped past 40 yards. In open terrain, it was useless. Soldiers who carried it knew its limits. They carried it anyway because the fights that killed point men didn't happen in open terrain. They happened at arm's length in green darkness. Ray Heltsley was a U.S. advisor who carried a Winchester Model 9 7112 gauge trench gun in Vietnam. He didn't carry it because it was issued. He carried it because he'd been in enough contact to know what worked at the distances where contact happened. He brought it home legally when his tour ended. A weapon from before the First World War carried through the last American ground war of the 20th century and walked out the other side. Heltsley's account confirmed what the military already knew, but never wanted to admit that a weapon designed before powered flight was still solving problems in the age of helicopter warfare. After 7 decades, 4 wars, and 1 execution threat from a European superpower, the 1897 was finally allowed to stop. Over 700. 60 years of continuous production. 1 design. Every pump-action shotgun in military and law enforcement service today. Every Mossberg, every Remington, every Ithaca traces its mechanical lineage to what John Browning built in 1897. The 1897 didn't just participate in the history of close-quarters combat. It wrote the doctrine. A pristine, authenticated World War I trench gun sells today for upward of $15,000. Collectors don't pay that for the steel. They pay for what the steel proved. John Moses Browning designed it to hunt ducks. Germany wanted men shot for carrying it. Marines pumped it through Pacific jungle. Veterans walked it home from Vietnam in their carry-on luggage. It was $25 of walnut and steel. It outlasted the empire that tried to ban it. It outlasted the wars that tried to exhaust it. It outlasted the ordnance officers who called it obsolete, the armies that replaced it, and the century that produced it. Some weapons win battles. This won arguments about what a weapon is allowed to.